Space Station's community has achieved something remarkable. It invented an entirely new genre of game, never seen before, and then after accomplishing such an achievement, it immediately killed and stagnated it. It's painful to see that despite the work of hundreds of different community members, for now a decade, Space Station has remained largely unchanged. What began as an innovative open source collaboration that pushed the boundaries of game design has solidified into the same servers sitting at the top of the hub. Colonial Marines, all flavors of TG and Bay, though mostly just TG nowadays, and furry ERP servers. And if anything new shows up, it holds players for a month or two, and it all goes back to normal. I've been on a journey to create something new in this barren wasteland of clones and copycats, and in the end I have not made a Space Station server per se, I have stumbled upon something a bit greater. I've been playing and engaging with Space Station's community for a decade of my life now. I've seen many servers come and go, many offshoot projects be born and die, communities rise and fall, many inexperienced wishful devs naively pursue their dreams to their demise, and well-organized teams of experienced developers walk in circles and get nothing done. I've been on the inside of many weird failed projects, and I've started many of said projects myself. And this video is an accumulation of my experiences with the game and its community. But before we get to any of this, we have to address the elephant in the room. A server that has inspired many naive devs like myself to push beyond traditional Space Station servers and try to build something new. A server that has showed that Space Station is not a weird tech demo that has neat ideas, but ultimately doomed to be a gimmicky, esoteric game that doesn't really fit into any genre. A server that has showed that what Space Station has started is just the tip of the iceberg rather than the final point of stagnation. So most casual players don't even know it exists. Ask any developer trying to push Space Station in a new direction, and they'll tell you. This server has been the core source of inspiration for all of them.
I remember looking at screenshots of, I don't know if you've ever seen it, and I thought that the concept of on a station was really interesting to me. I was super obsessed with the mechanics of.
I got into when I was around 14 years old. It's kind of crazy to think about it, how a game can change someone's life, but it did change a lot of people's. At least people I know, right? Some friends, it changed a lot of lives.
It showed me a glimpse in what Space Station 13 can be, kind of, you know, or if it has any kind of focus.
Yeah, we were like so addicted to we would never develop. And then people would be like, you're not even developing for the fucking game, you're just playing. And we were like, nah, we're developing, bruh. Well, like 24 hours playing non-stop.
I was kind of obsessed, dude. Like everybody at the time was obsessed because it was the most groundbreaking thing at the time. Like there wasn't any other server that was doing what was doing.
I mean, but of course the biggest influence I'd say would definitely be, I mean, just the fact that mechanics are used instead of like the stick of an admin to kind of force role plays. To me, like for me, is very magical.
This was about midway through my time playing, so I took a lot of inspiration for systems from that game, which I consider to be the peak of immersive servers.
Yes, I think it's pretty close to objective, but right now it's the only server I like. It's the only server with like actual artistic merit.
LifeWeb.
The LifeWeb.
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 LifeWeb. LifeWeb.
LifeWeb.
When you examine the diverse tree of Space Station codebases, you can lump things into a few general categories. Here's Goon, here's TG, here's all the Bay forks, here's the weird line of war servers, and here's the furry cesspit. But there's one server that stands alone, a bastion of originality. A server so innovative and unique, it's kind of hard to call the Space Station server at this point. Despite its drastic innovation upon the Space Station formula, you won't find any information about it in the mainstream hubs of Space Station community, as it actively avoids them. Access requires either a pre-2016 buyout account or a personal invitation from one of the trusted members. There are other ways in for those willing to look, but generally the server is inaccessible not only to the wider gaming community, but even to Space Station veterans.
We got banned because we found an exploit that could allow any account to play LifeWeb. So we got all our friends in the game a few minutes playing. We got a DM from Hydrate saying, man, it was like 5 different IPs connecting to the same account at the same time. What's going on?
So for those of you that don't know, LifeWeb is a server that branched out of Space Station streams in the very early days. It was created under a goal of true free-from role-playing, without rules. Built on GURP's tabletop system, LifeWeb's combat, stats, skills, and characters create a dynamic and self-policing environment, as opposed to Space Station, where really the only thing that matters about your character is the gear that you get from your job. A random hobo shouldn't be able to massacre half the server, not because there's an admin watching him, but because he's a starving, diseased-ridden, weak drug addict who will never even have a chance in a fair fight against a single member of the garrison, the security alternative on this universe. While the garrison members are strong, well-fed, trained and equipped, all the odds are stacked against the hobo. So the very rare rounds where some hobo does manage to go on a rampage are hilarious stories to be retold over and over again in the community, rather than going, admin, please stop him, something fun is happening.
2017, there was no looping ambience. It was a single sound that played. This is why you go back and watch that LifeWeb footage from 2013. You might not think anything of it, but you have to understand, from SS13's creation till like 2018, there was almost no sound in this fucking game. There was no walking sounds. There was no picking something up, dropping, didn't have a sound. There was a sound, I think, for punching somebody. Goon was the only one that had any intricate sound systems besides LifeWeb, and Goon was also closed source. You did not have running sounds, you didn't have dropping sounds, you didn't have different attack sounds, you didn't have swing sounds, you didn't have all of that stuff we have now just did not exist. You didn't have, vision cones. Everyone was trying to steal vision cones because that also did not exist outside of LifeWeb. Like, I had to make that from scratch. I had to come up with that. Me and Honkertron did. We had to do it ourselves. There was no one else had done it in the open source community. Nobody was interested in it.
I could go on very long rants about the brilliance of LifeWeb's game design decisions, however we'd be here for hours. So I'd like to show you the tip of the iceberg by recounting a round I've played in it. The main LifeWeb game mode is set in a post-apocalyptic feudal-esque fortress with a baron ruling over it and church hunting down heretics, but covering all of that is way out of scope of this video, so instead I'd like to cover a special game mode it has. Orbital Station 13, which introduces a side plot with a space station, which is somewhat easier to contrast with a more traditional space station round. My name is Andrei. I'm a research director on the Orbital Station 13, a top-tier facility owned by Trinet Corporation, an interstellar conglomerate that owns half of the human-inhabited universe. After a routine cryosleep, the crew of 14 awakens to blaring alarms and intense nausea. The station assistant, Lakamaka, has left a pre-recorded message revealing that someone on the crew has been sabotaging the station. Lakamaka has been injected with an implant that makes him a subservient zombie. Unable to reveal the traitor's identity, Lakamaka has encrypted the station's tech database to protect it and fled with the station's shuttle. As the crew gathers on the bridge, further details are revealed. The station has been cloaked in orbit for 600 years, while the world around it has collapsed. A wake-up signal has never been received from the headquarters. In that time, the station's AI has managed to commit suicide, which took out multiple key systems in the process and caused an emergency crew wake-up. There's no communications linked to Trinet headquarters nor to the sister station Aurora. Whether Trinet as a corporation even exists anymore is under question. The cloaking generators are non-functional and outside threats have surely already picked up the station on their radars. This is the first note of difference to vanilla Space Station. Without even talking about a smidge of gameplay, the whole set is so much more interesting. There's stakes, there's unknown, there's drama. Amplified by the fact that the main goal here is not to stop the traitor, but to create an interesting story, as there's an alternative win condition of capturing a scapegoat, a concept totally unthinkable in vanilla Space Station. Inconveniencing an innocent bystander and pulling them into a dynamic plot? Never. Vanilla Space Station is generally, yeah, we're researching plasma or something. And when some higher P servers try to expand on the lore, all they do is write paragraphs of backstories for random solar systems and corporations and whatever, but the main premise remains unchanged. Yeah, we're just kind of chilling here, and don't you dare try to inconvenience and interact with someone. As the crew is gathering to their senses and trying to get the station back and operational, the contrast with traditional Space Station gameplay becomes even clearer. In Space Station, every job has their start of round routine. Chemists make all the necessary chemicals, science shoves all the same exact items in the deconstructor, engineers boot up the engine, cargo sells crates and orders a bunch of stuff, and that is also the case here. The pilot goes out to scavenge for materials from derelict ships, engineers set up solar panels, the marshal goes around searching people and investigating documents for potential evidence, research director and the cyberspace specialists begin to hack the tech database to make some basic supplies, open communications, and eventually obtain weapons, and so on. But the big difference here is that Space Station embraces this, while LifeUp tries its hardest to stop players from falling into a routine. Every part of the game is screaming at you to start chaos, go break something, go accuse someone, go conspire against the authorities. The game is full of little details nudging players to start their plots, and I'd like to point out the most prominent mechanic, deep sleep psychosis, a condition caused by unnaturally long time spent in cryosleep. While most Space Station servers have some sort of rules that your character must be a mentally sane and well individual that is afraid of losing their job, LifeUp literally bakes in the fact that the situation is critical and people are only clinging onto their sanity. At some point in the round, most crew members will be hit by the psychosis, which gives them a random psychotic objective, and until it is completed, your whole screen will shake and gesture you to go mad and do crazy things. While this is mechanically very simple, due to its presentation it is incredibly effective. Even a little set dressing and presentation makes people take this very basic mechanic and roll with it, role-playing delusions and paranoia and whatever other mental obsession you can imagine. And it doesn't come off as cringe as all the Space Station higher P psychiatrist appointments where characters talk about their obscure mental disorders, because the insanity here is tangible. The crazy people are allowed to and encouraged to break equipment, attack the crew, scream out delusions instead of being contained into a sterile environment where all you can do is sit and talk. A round where everybody comfortably does their round start routine on Space Station is the goal and what all the admins and rules try to achieve. A round on LifeUp where everyone successfully did their round start routine is a boredom fest, a failure of the game that the developer will be looking into fixing. At the start of the round, I as a player immediately attempt to fall into my comfortable routine. I go into the research department, do a few basic setup tasks, and call out to my specialist to get to his post. However, the gods of RNG have acted very aggressively, and this particular round, multiple people right off the bat are having psychotic attacks. The cyberspace specialist, Michael Titer, who is the only person on the station capable of interfacing with the cyberdeck, a requirement for getting anything out of the tech database, is freaking out and not in any state to do his job. Now, if this was Space Station, where there's massive research crews of 10 with tasks that 1 or 2 people could handle with ease, I'll get the second or the third specialist in the crew to do the job. But here, every job has 1 or 2 people dedicated to it. Each person on the crew serves a distinctive purpose and must be accounted for. Whereas on Space Station, you can die of boredom in a random corner and nobody gives a shit. The specialist is missing from his post, and the Psy Counselor, whose job it is to snap people out of it with their psionic powers, seems to be suspiciously absent. So I have to go and engage with specialist antics whether I want it or not. This is the underlying brilliance of LifeUp. With Space Station's design, one-person power gaming ruins the roleplay for everyone and forces them to power game in their turn. With LifeUp, One-person role-playing ruins paragaming for everyone and causes them to roleplay in return. The most optimal power gaming move, in my situation, if I wanted to go get the best possible gear and weapons from the tech database, is to go and roleplay with Michael to calm him down. I go looking for Michael, who is starting a ruckus in the lobby. If this is a normal space station server, he would have already been boinked with something like, "Can you explain yourself?" Because he was breaking "do your job" rule, and the player in my shoes would have ran at him and spammed his arms, trying to immediately get their valid kill, stopping the plot in its tracks. I did not try to immediately kill or subdue him, because it's not a given I would succeed, considering my character is a research director, not some martial arts expert. The only person on the ship who could take someone in a one-on-one fight is probably the intersecurity marshal, or the captain with his deadly revolver. If I were to try to subdue the specialist, on my own, we'd both end up on the floor, groaning from pain and bleeding all over the place. On top of that, Michael has found himself a taser, and I am totally unarmed. So I scream out over the radio for any sort of help, but despite my best efforts, Michael takes off running. The chase leads us into the vents, where we crawl through dark and tight passageways. Through a lucky RNG roll, I managed to knock the taser out of his hands, and I used the taser to try to bring him over to Medbay, where I can hopefully find Lynn, the Psy Counselor, to finally calm the specialist down. Our brawl continues into Medbay, and just as I predicted a second earlier, me being a puny and fragile research director, I very quickly collapse from exhaustion, after which Michael beats my face in and makes us escape once again. I'd like to note here that if he really wanted to, he could have just kept bashing my head in, and I would have been totally helpless to stop it. He could have killed me. He would not have been banned. There's no admins watching anyone. There would have been no out-of-character consequences to it. However, the plot would have probably turned into the intersecurity marshal, aka Mini Doom guy, who isn't fragile and puny like me, coming over to beat his skull in and throw him into the brick as the traitor scapegoat. And Michael's player is very well aware of that. So despite the fact that in our current circumstances our characters are antagonistic and are in conflict, we as players are collaborating to form this interesting narrative. And somehow, despite there being zero out-of-character conflict escalation rules, this engagement naturally developed and escalated better than anything I've had on Space Station, where there's pages of essays on how to properly escalate conflict in the rule sets. At this point, I'm furious at Lynn ignoring the situation as I scream out profanities at her over the radio. I go directly to her office and vent all of my frustrations. Finally, with Lynn attempting to help, we go looking for Michael, who disappeared into the maintenance ducts again. Half-conscious, Michael is pulled back to Medbay, where the whole Medbay crew gathers to decide what to do with him. Lynn goes to grab a straitjacket. The geneticist is very eager to play around with the neuroscience machinery and refragment Michael, which Moses, the medical officer, agrees with, as he still holds a grudge to Michael punching him in the face earlier in the round. Refragmentation is a really clever mechanic to get rid of undesirable players. When a person is seated in the machine, they can have their personality refragmented, meaning they become a ghost, and a random ghost is given an option to take over playing as them. It's an in-character way for the crew to filter a bad player without explicitly killing them, as everyone's skills and abilities are incredibly valuable. Having had a very enjoyable experience role-playing with Michael, I use any in-character reasoning I can come up with to justify not refragmenting him. Moises continues to hold his grudge and bicker, suggesting to refragment Michael and refusing to give him any painkillers. As mine and Michael's conflict slowly turns into a bond, he looks to me to keep him safe as I advocate that he's the best damn specialist I've ever worked with. Finally, Michael as well. Physically, at the very least. Now a final trip to Psych Counselor office. After some needed venting, a burst of energy goes over the room. Michael's voice calms. He takes a very needed nap, and now he can think straight. Meanwhile, while all of this was happening, the captain has been shouting orders over the radio, barely any of which were followed. Me and Michael are getting no work done in the research department. The junior engineer was bumbling around, getting himself stuck and confused, which only took up chief engineer's time. Medical department has not dealt with the psychotic crew members. On and on. Captain is sick of everything and shoots himself. The captain has shot himself. Chief engineer and marshal are arguing over who's in charge now. The geneticist is busy with his grandiose experiments of cloning a new captain and refragmenting people. Lynn and Moises have barely put any effort into helping anyone. The whole place is going to shit. Me and Michael can only trust each other now. Finally, an hour into the round, we get to doing our actual job. As me and Michael continue our work on the cyber deck, the round slows down a little. Couple side plots arise, which for the sake of brevity I will skip over. After performing bare minimum duties of unlocking the water chip and cybertech safety systems, being unable to trust any of the crew, especially the marshal, we decide to equip ourselves. First thing on the list, all-access keycard. And just as we're in the process of unlocking the keycard, an alarm rings out. A passenger vessel is approaching. It can only be the Charon, the station's shuttle that Lakamaka has commandeered 6 centuries ago. The station's defense systems would obliterate any other vessel approaching, yet Lakamaka couldn't possibly be alive after 600 years. So who pilots the shuttle? Well, the shuttle is how the rest of the server gets to interact with the station plot. The shuttle exists as a relic in the fortress, one of the few remaining pieces of functional Trinet technology. The fortress's Baron, acting under orders from the God King, has mounted an expedition to the station. Their goal? Disable our security systems to allow God King's fleet to board and strip the facility of its ancient technological treasures and forgotten knowledge. Having finally gotten our keycard, things are really escalating. Marshall is screaming in psychotic rage over the radio. Weird people from the shuttle are talking nonsense. An explosive device has been detected on the station. Everything is going to shit and we cannot trust anyone. The plan is set. Each deck of the station has one lifeboat that holds one person. We split up. Michael goes to medbay, I go to the command deck. Using the all-access keycard, I enter the bridge and launch the lifeboats. We hug each other goodbye, wish each other luck, and hope to see each other again on the other side. The bridge is on lockdown, probably due to Marshall trying to guard it, so take a detour to look for a blunt object to smash a window. At which point I run into the borders.
A crew member's death detected.
Two co-workers, who hated and fought with each other most of the round, slowly became the closest friends on the station and attempted their escape together, violently failed, and in their last breaths were both trying to look out for each other. And this is just one round. I had rounds where I'm the captain running circles with the chief engineer and marshal, accusing each other of being traitors while the actual traitor does their objectives in peace. I've had rounds where everything has gone to shit and I was a plain logistics officer who's just trying to feed everyone, end up sitting in a dark room with the cadet, trying to tell him everything is going to be okay. And unlike Space Station, where rounds like this are a once-in-a-million occasion, the entire game is built and trying to force players into conflict. And yes, it has many flaws, and like Space Station, there are many dull rounds. Rounds like this are way more common than on Space Station. Playing Life Up has been the most unique gaming experience of my life. The spectrum of emotion the game leads you on is absolutely unmatched. It can be a horror game, a comedy, an adrenaline-pumping action game, an investigative experience about uncovering forbidden knowledge, a family drama, political intrigue, and all of the mixtures of the above. Such an incredibly unique experience, yet nobody in the world knows it exists. Space Station as a whole is already a niche game, but due to a few big YouTubers covering and it being cited as inspiration by a few big indies, is causing the name to be somewhat known in the bigger gaming circles. But Life Up, this completely alien piece of media with game design unlike any other game, is just sitting here in obscurity. But you know what's even more crazy? Despite Life Up's greatness, I can see so many flaws in it. So many bits of technical depth as a remnant of being a Space Station spin-off that unnecessarily hold it back. This is what has driven me mad. I can see Life Up's brilliance, but I can also see Life Up is just one take on this new genre, with so many variables that can be tweaked for different games and experiences.
I was interested in how Life Up tackles a lot of issues that Space Station 13 has, but blindly so, because in retrospect Life Up also is riddled with issues that I personally have a problem with.
I'm not here to shill Life Up and make it popular. It was never designed to be accessible to a wide audience, and it will never will be. Nor am I here to advocate that it should change to something that it's not. But I am here to tell people about its brilliant game design decisions, and how big studios make games about teamwork like Squad, where having 5 people provide covering fire for each other requires a miracle, while some random Russian guy made a game where 60 plus people consistently participate and roleplay together to create complex narratives. Life Up is just the tip of the iceberg of what's possible with the game concept Space Station has come up with. So how come Life Up stands alone? Why has no other Space Station server come close to captivating its brilliant design? Especially when so many have tried so hard, me included. The year is 2019. Seth-tide is in full swing, and I'm getting a little fed up with mainstream Space Station to a point where the only server I play is Life Up. As many other naive devs, I feel inspired to make something similar, to take the misguided mainstream paths of Space Station and steer them into something better and more engaging.
What is zoo? There's an entire zoo here. The fuck is a snork?
Having been mingling in obscure Space Station offshoot communities, one codebase jumps to my mind: Interbay. This raised a generation of wannabe Life Up clones. What the codebase was is just an old Bay 12 codebase with some new UI, graphics, couple features, and atmospheric sound effects. The codebase started as a heavily Life Up inspired server, and I cannot emphasize how many different offshoots were created that all failed in identical ways. Everyone wanted to be the next popular Grimdark server. All the hard work of creating a Grimdark atmosphere is basically there. Just port a few features and you're good to go. So how come such an incredibly obvious idea didn't work out for so many people?
Yeah, there were resource packs. There were Life Up resource packs. Some people who decompiled the Life Up resources, and you could like just access the sprites. I could not help myself. I just decided, hey, I can do Life Up. I can do Life Up even better. Actually, that was how delusional I was. And I tried. For like a couple months, I used the modern Baycode or something. I don't remember, but I used some form of Baycode to. I just kept jamming in LifeWeb sprites, LifeWeb sound effects, and doing a little bit of mapping. It didn't really go very far, but I did
exploring space and stuff, and there would be a trader and shit. Until we said, yo, why don't we make this a little bit green dark? So I ported the FOV from Base Station. Combat mode, dodge, parry, swords. It was like still Base Station, but it had FOV, swords, dodge, combat.
My project had just failed catastrophically. I was really upset that nothing I did worked. And then I turned around and immediately saw people fork off of it and just like, they would just like make offensive shit with it. Like, I don't know, like Interbay, but you can say the N-word, you know, like that'd be the kind of servers I saw.
Having no experience in Bion development, I set off, adding a feature here and a feature there. However, as the initial development hope slowly dies down, and the development turns into a slow grind, it became harder and harder to stay motivated and interested. Despite making a few features, I realized that there's more to a complete project than having a cool atmosphere and a couple of neat features. The fundamental game loop is still same as really old Bay 12, and nothing has been fixed or changed about the game.
What the fuck? I can just spam Fireball. What? This code is broken. I can just spam Fireball.
And as simple as it sounds, very quickly after starting, I just drop it. While this may seem like a skill issue or some other problem specific to me, that was the fate of every Interbay wannabe LifeWeb clone. Naive developers would come in, add a few minor features, and host it with a new name, expecting anyone to take it seriously and roleplay, and they'd all die before ever being alive. The Interbay idea being so obvious and so seemingly easily achievable attracted a lot of inexperienced people, a lot of whom fell into the pitfall of advertising the server and getting the players to play it before there's actually a game to play. They tunnel vision on the most obvious aspect of LifeWeb, its grimdark atmosphere. They think, if only I can replicate it, people will take the game seriously like they do with LifeWeb. But instead they make their poop dark Grimshark Dark Station Orbital Nemesis 14, that might look a little cool in first impression, falls flat the moment someone actually tries to play it. As a final point here, I'd like to show these two screenshots. Look pretty similar, except this is just a fairly old build of LifeWeb, which still remains most of its brilliant design decisions. And this is Fireweb, also known as Brazilweb or Fartweb. Fireweb was meant to be a one-to-one clone of LifeWeb, and as you can see, just like all the other LifeWeb-inspired servers, the most effort was put into copying the aesthetic of the game, not the underlying gameplay systems. It was riddled with bugs and just poorly made mechanics, so even when the game design decisions were needed to be copy-pasted without much thought, the lack of skilled programmers and general mismanagement made it a mess.
But then when we opened Fireweb for the first time, after Tux made the map, changed the sprites, it had like zero content whatsoever. But the first time he opened, we got like 33 players. So after that, we were still developing, but we were, as said before, we were kind of dumb. Tux didn't really have experience, so he'd code something broken. And then that thing broken would be breaking the game. And I would be a retard for saying like, no, you coded it, you fix it. And then the game would be broken for longer.
Yeah, that's something that got me really mad at Comic-Con, is that he focused a lot on the appearance of the game, like the graphics. And we barely had anything to do in the game, but the graphics looked good. Props to him though, because he's very good at this. But we have to get our priorities right. It doesn't matter if it looks good if the game doesn't work, right? But that's actually one of the reasons now I remembered for me to crash out and get mad at him and leave the server.
I reworked some shit, especially involving the shadow casting system, which was the first of its kind. Comical is fucking crazy. We did it before fucking Randy did. Randy 100% got inspired by Comical's work and it was like, fuck it, I'm gonna do it, but better.
How many countless Reddit posts pop up where someone brags about the great server idea they have, and please join our Discord to keep up with updates. Oh, also, by the way, I don't know how to code, or how to sprite, or how to host a server. Can someone please do it for me? That's the kind of zero experience developers Interbay and similar LifeWeb clone projects attracted. Well, obviously I commend the effort. It's way better to try to make something than just make Reddit posts. These kind of servers are still on the starter end of the Dunning-Kruger curve. So if a flood of inexperienced devs is the reason for failures of Interbay, why has no experienced dev made something out of it? Well, there is actually a successor server that came out of it, but more on that in a second. Game dev by its nature is a very iterative and failure-oriented process. You build things, you playtest, you see what's fun, what's not fun, what works, what doesn't, and let's play a little game. What do you do when players are not having fun in a particular part of the game or not using game systems as initially intended? A. Pretend the problem doesn't exist. B. Make a rule forcing players to play the game like they have to. C. Apply game design and fix the problem. D. Kill the server and blame it on bad players. And if you follow that process through with Interbay, and most space station codebases that is, you end up completely disassembling Interbay and building something entirely different from its corpse. At the end of the day, no amount of atmosphere and fancy graphics is going to save Interbay from being an old Bay 12 codebase, with the same boring and purposeless roles and routines. The amount of work it takes to actually make those roles work and be fun is gigantic, and the work of creating the atmosphere and fancy graphics gets dwarfed to a point where it's negligible, and there would have been no difference than if you started development from actual Bay 12, or going back to even older versions, or even just starting from scratch. So what's that one success story of Interbay? Well, it's the same guy who originally made Interbay, Matt.
And it sucked. It was fucking garbage. Interbay 1.0 is the worst fucking shit you've ever played in your life. And as was common on LifeWeb at the time back then, when I made this, the cult basically just murder-boned. Like, there was no RP. So we did Interbay 2 basically with, like, more traditional antags, like, basically traders. So Interbay 2 was much more, I don't know, grimdark Space Station 13 than Interbay was, if that makes sense. And so then when I did IS-12, I said, I'm curious, I'm gonna do this one whitelist only. There's going to be no public way to play this. And long story short, I couldn't. It sucked. But that was IS-12. So that was me. Basically, I was remaking the first Interbay again in IS-12. And so that one didn't even die. That one I just decided I wanted to make Warfare for, halfway like through it. And then most of the people I was playing with didn't want to play Warfare at all. So I said, okay, well, I'm just gonna make Warfare, and then that'll be that. I would do it every single day. I would host, I would test, I would change, I would host, I would test, I would change, like every single day. And it was the same thing for Reborn too. I made what was called IS-12 Classic, which was me trying to remake the original IS-12 again in Warfare's codebase, because Warfare was so much more up to date than the original IS-12 ever was. And it was really bad. And I was really embarrassed by how bad it was. I don't know if you ever played it. I don't know if you were around back then. It only lasted a week, and basically the feedback I got was, this is the worst fucking shit I've ever played in my life, Matt. Go die. And so I was really depressed from that, and I said, what if I, instead of remaking something again, what if I tried to make something new? So I used the Warfare setting, reuse a map from Warfare that I edited to have the jobs in, and then I would just test constantly and iterate every single time, take in player feedback, and I didn't really have much planned at all. Ideas would just come to me, and I would just do them as soon as they came to me. As soon as I got, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, I would change it, or, you know, I don't like this meta, I would change it, and I never really planned out anything.
Reborn, Matt's current life project, is a genuinely unique experience and deserves recognition of what many, many man-hours of tears, blood, and sweat can achieve. Not taking what's there and adding a few tweaks, but having a will to go through with a long project and making something out of nothing. Game dev isn't easy, there's no cheat codes, you can fool people with a Reddit post and hype people to play a game for a few sessions, and maybe if you're really good at hyperpropaganda, the players will claim that the server is good. Chungus Station is a great example of this phenomenon. It's a server I slapped together in a few evenings, with zero substance or thought in it. Yet despite that, for a few sessions, it has climbed quite high on the hub, just from pure bizarrity of it and the hype train. At the end of the day, people may say many things, however people vote with their time. And if people end up playing a different space station server or an entirely different game, you as a developer have failed to captivate your audience, and you really have to reflect on why.
I didn't expect Interbay to be as big of a deal as it was. I guess in hindsight I should have, but like I really thought that everyone would have forgotten about it by now, and that all these servers wouldn't exist. I think that's the weirdest part to me, is just seeing something that I made become ubiquitous, you know what I mean? Vision cones, like Zeth used my vision cones in Roguetown. And it's like, it's weird to me because LifeWeb had all this stuff. Anyone could have made it. Anyone could have made their own Interbay, but nobody did, you know? Like nobody else replicated those features. And I mean, you can argue that, like, I didn't do a good job replicating them, and I would agree with you. But, like, I did replicate all that sound stuff, all the immersion stuff that everyone takes for granted now. And it's really fascinating to me to see it no longer be considered new. To see LifeWeb no longer, like, just at a glance, you know, the vision cones, all the sounds, to no longer be considered, you know, new.
"2020. Sigma Predator enlightens me with an abandoned project of him remaking Space Station from ground up. Zero bloat, maximum performance, no lag. A perfect foundation for building something new and unique. With the hindsight of the Interbay project and filled with free time and ambition, I began working on a new server. I was gonna innovate at every step. It was gonna have oppressive Grimshard lore, medical dismemberment system previously unimagined in Space Station, secrets, GURPS combat, and more. This time, the development grind doesn't immediately collapse, and I started building an extremely convoluted medical system that at the time of writing, I don't even remember all the details of. There were some plans to have certain injuries be able to split people in half and have variety cybernetics, and it just spirals out of control as complexity exponentially grows with my skills struggling to keep up. The codebase becomes an incomprehensible mess of ideas and code that collapses very quickly under its own weight. Now it clearly isn't hopeless. You can take a step back, remove a lot of the code, and rework everything. However, where do you even begin? What am I even making? A Dwarf Fortress clone? A medical simulator? A role-playing game? Should movement be slow, immersive, and boring? Or should it be fast but also really meme-inducing and counterproductive to roleplay? Should damage be forgiving or punishing? Should players have power over other players and be able to ruin rounds on a whim? Should everyone be given an objective which ends up annoyingly constricting everything? Or should the game be a free-form sandbox where people die of boredom when they don't have a gimmick? How do you make a medical system that isn't brain-dead, click until horizontal of vanilla Space Station, yet that provides reasonably realistic responses to player actions without making a gigantic mess that tries to beat Dwarf Fortress at its own game? Every centimeter of every game system, mechanic, and interaction is filled with decisions to be made. And no, make it realistic is not the valid answer here. This is a top-down tile-based game. At a certain point, realism is a totally abstract idea. Tarkov is a realistic military shooter. Bear with me here, I swear this is relevant. In a recent update, they added a hitbox system, where instead of armor giving protection to your torso hitbox, the armor adds new armor plate hitboxes that bullets may or may not hit. I think at the first glance it's clear that this made the game more realistic, however it introduced a problem. Now you can get shot twice in the shoulder area, which would kill you because you took too much damage to your torso. The real-life counterparts of armor and plates are designed to protect organs. In real life, getting hit in the shoulder would probably hurt quite a bit, but it wouldn't kill you. This is why in the next patch after the update, the armor hitboxes were artificially enlarged beyond their realistic sizes, essentially rolling back the update in order to actually make the game more realistic, since now you no longer die from a stray bullet to your shoulder. Actually, I don't like that world. The game is now less realistic, but more believable and immersive. This is where realism is a very moot point and uncertain mechanics is nonsensical. Yes, you generally want to build things to resemble real life in order to serve immersion, but you can't just map reality to a game one-to-one and expect that game to have any coherent design or structure. Space Station's and LifeUp's obsession with flawless simulation of reality is a relic of back when the game was a realistic atmospheric simulator. All realism does is slow down the development time and reduce performance, while the end result might not even be realistic at all. Yeah, atmospherics uses real physics equations and constants to calculate exact Kelvin temperature of density in this gas, but you're still gonna put on a breath mask and take a spacewalk, after which you'll be fine after one injection of made-up sci-fi chemicals. Now obviously you want some systematic approach to medical combat, as otherwise you get TG, where a bat is a good weapon not because it's a bat, but because someone went and hard-coded an extra feature of knockback. Believable systematic design that serves a specific purpose, not realism or complexity, should be the goal. And this is another aspect of LifeUp where people tend to tunnel vision. Every LifeUp clone and inspired project seems to get the idea that you need to have the most autistic and complex medical system imaginable, but at the end of the day, the sole purpose of the medical system is to serve roleplay and immersion. This is a role-playing game, not a surgeon simulator, nor this is the War Fortress. If you smash someone over the head with a crowbar, you expect them to get knocked out or something similar. And that's all the medical system does, whether there's simulation of damage going to layers of skin and skull and transferring damage to the brain, or 2 lines of code, roll d20 and hit the head, and subtract health attribute, is completely irrelevant to the player. The best game designer is not the one who designs the most convoluted simulator, but instead the one who makes players act in a way that creates memorable experiences and keeps them immersed.
And I think that the biggest lesson that I learned about development when I was working on Redux is that perfectionism is a trap. Even though it's obvious, a lot of people get into it, is that, oh, this doesn't work right, before it even becomes needed. I think it's very prevalent in Space Station 13, this kind of premature optimization kind of thing, like the almost software and engineer approach to this game. It's not inherently bad, but it's gonna consume more of your time. You just need to take that into account. That if you're gonna design a system that can handle everything before you really have a need for that, you might run into the issue that nothing really needs to use that system and you're just wasted your time. I had a lot of that kind of thing. When I designed something, it's just left unused. Atmos is is a very notable example of that.
Don't get so worked up about code quality. Picture the game you want and work backwards from there. If you get too hung up doing things right, you won't get anything done. Approach what you're making like a painting you can see in your head, not a platform or a project. I've shot myself in the foot by making bugs for myself, but if I took things slow, this game would have never been finished.
Fundamentally, the game can function on a literal health bar and work completely fine. The medical system is there just to provide more plausibility and immersion to the stories. And in case that sounds ridiculous, Old Bay and TG's medical system both have a health variable that starts at 100. Then each time you take damage, the health decreases. When you reach 0, you go unconscious. When it reaches minus 100, you die. Yeah, there's a quirk there, an edge case there, bleeding and such, but fundamentally, the entirety of Space Stations functions on a health bar. No surgeon simulators, no Dwarf Fortress autism. This is where the infamous tedious clicking until horizontal of Space Station comes from. Now obviously this is not great, however despite this I can still recall many occasional fantastic rounds I've played on servers with a health system like this. So now that we realize that the health bar is a valid starting point, rather than having to reinvent the Dwarf Fortress, there's actually quite a bit of leeway in what we can do. So how does one go about designing the medical system, or the combat system, or any large and complicated part of the game that is? Creating even small, simple indie games can be quite a technical and design feat. How does one even begin to attempt to make something with so many moving parts and variables like a space station server?
Like, yeah, that's the most interesting one. The original idea was like, okay, what if I do like a steampunk type setting, like Victorian era science fiction? Wouldn't that be cool? And that was mostly the idea. That's mostly how it went. But what happened is that was like a fucking stupidly ambitious idea, and I got nowhere with it.
No plan survives the first contact with the enemy, but planning is indispensable. Every aspiring game dev had some idea for their perfect best game ever made, and they attempted to make it. After countless wasted hours, they would realize the infeasibility of it and all the design flaws of it. When you're building a complex game, there's a dependency stack, so to say. You start by making some fundamental systems and features, some technical stuff, lobby, rounds, movement, inventories, UI, foundational systems. Then you start expanding and building up more systems, combat, medical, traitors, jobs, events. Those high-level systems depend on the low-level systems. Now, if there's a change in a low-level system, then it directly impacts all of its dependencies, both on a technical level and a design level. Higher-level systems might need a code rewrite to adjust to changes and be redesigned where the game is at odds with itself and doesn't have a unified direction. If you double movement speed, it has direct implications in combat and indirect implications in balance of traitors, jobs, and medical. If we add the weight systems to inventories, then it has implications once again on how certain jobs work, what traitors can do, and menial moment-to-moment interactions by players with the environment. If we shorten a round to 25 minutes, it will completely collapse the whole space station game loop. Any small change to the fundamental systems cascades throughout the project, changing a humanly incomprehensible number of variables and interactions. And this is where planning fails. You can spend months working on the most meticulous game design document, think of every edge case and interaction, and then spend 2 years building up your perfect game and have your giant stack of dependencies trawl through the skies. Then you let in the players, and the players find an unfixable exploit in one of your fundamental systems, and your years of work collapse in on itself and send you to square zero. Or even what's more commonly happens is that the fundamental systems are taken as sacred and infallible, because the plan says so. So they're never fixed out of pure stubbornness and or realization that fixing them would require remaking half the game. So instead they attach tumors of systems that try and inevitably fail to fix the fundamental issues. Taking away tasers from security will not fix the stun meta-based combat. Adding enforced roleplay rules will not make that roleplay more fun, and instead just make it more robotic. Adding a Grimshard atmosphere will not change the fact that the game feels and plays like a brick. And of course the classic, adding admins does not fix the core gameplay and balance issues the game has.
I also give an advice for people that are making their game, like, befriend the people that grief your game, because they are very good at finding out how to break your game. Like, I'm not even joking, the people that grief our game helped us with developing like a lot, because they could find bugs that we would never imagine.
This is why design is iterative. You build a system on top of your dependency stack. You let players test it, you let them break it, you let them exploit it, see what works, what doesn't work, what fits with your vision, and what doesn't. You make changes accordingly, and now the dependency stack is rock solid. And 2 years later, when your dependency stack is gigantic, players will be finding exploits at the top where it's easily fixable, not at the bottom where it collapses the entire game on itself.
Because that is what the pitfall I see that so many people have, is they either have too much planning and no product, or they don't iterate fast enough once they get the product. Like every Fallout 13 server essentially immediately stagnates because they don't actually change anything. They don't take player feedback into account, and they don't ever iterate on it.
Planning comes in through a vague list of emotions and experiences you want the players to go through. You might have an idea for some system or interaction, but those systems interactions should always be put to scrutiny, and the leading decider is how players respond and act within those systems. You have to accept that the players will not play your perfect dollhouse, and instead do whatever they want. So you have to scrap and rework systems to make players play out some semblance of your perfect dollhouse. No plan survives the first contact with the enemy in this case being the players. At the time of me abandoning the project, I did not have an answer to these design questions, combined with the scale of the project becoming very clear as I fell down the Dunning-Kruger curve, resulted in the project dying after a few months of work.
You don't need all of the stuff TG gives to you in their last versions. The only thing you really need is the basic structure and no clutter, because you're the one who wishes to add his own clutter. You don't need anyone else's clutter. And that's why the TG from 2015, 2016, something like that. That version of TG already has first three factors, so it's structurally more coherent than Goon Station that it was forked from, but it's still pretty empty.
But in 2022, an interesting codebase crosses my radar. Well, rather it crosses the radar of a good friend of mine, CD, who conscripts me into his, soon-to-be ours project. ITWeb? CDEDweb? What? Whatever, better name pending web. The codebase originates from a fairly quirky branch of codebases that spun out of Ava's Battlegrounds into Lebensraum into short 1713 before being turned into Civ 13. The 1713 is what we're using. Its beauty is that it's still a space station codebase with most of the under the hood stuff, however it has managed to remove all of the bloat, Atmos, power, genetics and so on. Space Station started as an atmospheric sim, so all of those systems are deeply ingrained within the essence of Space Station. My respect goes to whatever coder has managed to go to the hell of debloating Space Station this much. And just like the last project, compile times and performance are lightning fast, making it a perfect base for building up. Plus this time I had an actual spriter on board. A LifeUp-inspired Space Station server that takes some of LifeUp's ideas and puts them into a new setting will always just be that, a LifeUp clone. We take a step back, rethink and rebuild Space Station into something new. Anything you make going down the same path as LifeUp will be judged and compared to LifeUp, and it's plainly stupid to expect to outmatch someone with more experience, skill and most importantly development time than yourself. In order to make a LifeUp successor, we'll need to build a new path. With many lessons learned and experience accumulated, this is the project. How will it go wrong this time?
Government by the people, of the people, for the people. But the people are retarded.
The failure of modern space station is designed by a committee. When trying to make some sort of a coherent experience, you need a vision and you need to stick to it. The problem in question, what is space station about, has a different answer to every person you ask. There was never single vision or plan behind the game. It was open source for most of its history and anyone that wanted to could contribute. In a way that was good, since it was an incredible breeding ground of ideas, and without it I would not be sitting here attempting to unlock Space Station's full potential. But all of those ideas competed with each other and no single vision could be established. And whatever visions were established were built upon unsuitable foundations of another vision. Primarily, Space Station started as an atmospheric simulator, but in a whodunit sandbox social deduction game with crew doing their jobs and traitors sabotaging them was slapped on that. And on top of those, a role-playing story generator environment was built. And this is why you need planning and a person or a team in charge with a clear vision of what they want the game to be. If you take foundation of Space Station and build it to its logical conclusion, you get Stationeers, an engineering sandbox, not Space Station. If you take the sandbox job simulator aspect and surround it with appropriate foundation and supplemental features, you get Barotrauma, a goofy systematic sandbox game.
Bitch! Wait, what? I thought that was unloaded.
Yeah, LifeWeb, I mean, yeah, in a way, yes, because LifeWeb just showed me a glimpse in what Space Station 13 can be, kind of, you know, or if it has any kind of focus. Even stuff like Colonial Marines just shows that Space Station 13 has a lot of potential if it just starts to make up its mind on what exactly it wants to be.
The breeding ground of Space Station has plenty of ideas up for grabs, and I am after the role-playing story generator, in a way the essence or spirit of Space Station, since you can look at servers like Fallout 13, which are very much still Space Station, yet they don't possess either of the first two elements. In a way, there's a simplicity in all of this. Figure what you want, gather the people who are willing to put in the man hours, and it's almost a given you'll get what you want. It just takes time and experience to nail down what do you exactly want, instead of cramming every random idea you have into a project. It takes time to find people who see you eye to eye on your vision and you trust to stick through with it. And it takes a lot of time to develop the discipline and the drive to keep putting in the hours into a project to get it to completion.
I had to waste years, even and I still don't it's the Redux is now 5.5 years old in active development actually, and I still don't have a coherent idea of the game I want to play.
Replace the assets of whatever codebase you're working on. It's okay to use placeholders, but I replaced almost every placeholder in SS13 with Rotown assets within a couple years as a high priority. That is an essential part of making your codebase something that will last, and why Rotown will last a long time. You can always make things prettier later, but default SS13 sprites are ugly forever.
So we sat down and thought out a new design for our game. We began by giving the codebase its own feel and identity. Redo the lobby, redo the UI, redo all the sprites. It's a very natural desire when making a UI to just rearrange the elements into a different order and call it a day like so many servers do. But if you want to make something actually different, you gotta think outside the box. Barotrauma is a very nice example here. The game started out with a very clunky Space Station-like HUD where you put individual items into hands and slots. However, fast forward to Steam release and they've simplified UI into a generic hotbar that automatically handles hands and all the other stuff. At the start the idea seems ridiculous and against the spirit of the game. In hindsight, it's obvious. Thinking about the main gripes of the UI, the number one thing that comes up is limb targeting and general combat. It's not really a problem in vanilla Space Station since it boils down to clicking onto horizontal, but for servers like LifeWeb, it's incredibly cumbersome to travel 5 screen lengths back and forth to different combat intents, modes, weapons, and limbs. Another gripe we had was the fact that despite having a game in front of your screen, you spent over half the time reading tiny text in the bottom right of the screen. So the two pillars of our new design were avoid chatbox and if possible completely eliminate it, and streamline combat to not be about how quickly and precisely one can click, but instead to make it more methodical and maybe throw in some charged attacks and long cooldowns in order to let people talk and interact mid-combat instead of furiously typing help, maintenance. But we'll worry and design that when we get to combat. We don't want to overbuild our stack of dependencies. We go one step at a time, test, and iterate. The biggest chunks of text in the text box is talking and examining, and a lot of code bases already have a solution. RuneChat and hover text for examining. In case of RuneChat, we just have to copy that as is, and for examining, move the hover text to the mouse and throw in a description. Then we start brainstorming ideas for the main UI, and we stumble upon the idea of having a self-display doll that would also be your inventory, so you equip and take stuff off by clicking yourself, and an enemy display doll that would let you examine other people and do combat by clicking on the static doll, removing the annoying requirement for clicking precision in combat, as well as serving as an intuitive way to examine someone. It would also alleviate the really dodgy menu for stripping someone. And once we take this fundamental change, the floodgates open to a million new ideas and interactions, which were previously unimaginable. You can now have creatures with different limbs than the standard humanoid. Clothing doesn't have to confine to slots and function more fluidly. Think of something like Neo Scavenger. Injuries, instead of being attached to limbs and hit zones, can be a direct physical item with a specific location on the body. Obviously, it will take playtesting and some experimenting to decide whether any of these are worthwhile and add anything to the game. My point here is that this is how you unlock the potential of Space Station. Not iteration at the high level, where the game really doesn't change. Whether you set in Fallout, or 40k, or Aliens, or SCP, or whatever, that's just all set dressing that leaves the game still playing like a brick. But make a tiny change or innovation at the low-level systems, and the whole ocean of ideas is open to experiment and iterate in. Throw in a few side tangents with some other features and a lot of tired wrangling with Bion trying to get it to work properly, and 4 months of work later we basically had the system working, at least at the base level. There's a lot of stuff to smooth out and improve, but again, it's all about iteration and playtesting. First few playtests consisted of grabbing a couple of people, letting them click around, which inevitably lead to everything exploding with errors and bugs.
Hold on, CD, was it doing something about unrecognized resized verb or some shit?
Yes. Unrecognized or inaccessible verb dot resized.
Can I kill you?
Not yet.
Why is this
We're
a
fixing
verb?
that. On the other fixed
You need admin access for dolls to work. Now everyone, Delivery host.
Wait, I'm not.
With some innovation done, we start brainstorming about the game mode and the game loop. What did the players actually do? Coming from Space Station's and LifeUp's influence, it's tempting to design a massive interconnected game mode with competing factions and such. However, this goes back to the planning problem. It would be working way too long in the dark. We tend to downsize and make a smaller game mode. However, despite our best efforts, scope creep sets in, and even our downscaled version of the game mode becomes way too large. Every tiny feature, idea, or tweak spiral out of control with what about that, and how does this interact with that, and what if we add this feature, and what if we make that persistent? And those tiny changes kept stacking up and increasing scale and complexity of the game mode, while also looping in on themselves, as we just walk circles of possible future ideas without very clear goals. We spend more time talking about what features and lore we'd like to have in the future, rather than what needs doing this immediate moment. No surprise, the progress slows to a crawl. Despite a very promising start, a couple months of the slow and demoralizing crawl, and the project's end looms on the horizon. We're still committed to the project and intend to restart it in the near future, but for now we take a break. I'd like to recall a round I played on Reborn, the successor of Warfare and Interbay. My first round on it more specifically. I readied up as the wildcard role, which made me a prisoner with 2 other prisoners. As we talked some trust into the warden, she let us out and let us gear up so we can do some mining. But the moment she turned her back, we smashed her skull in and began plotting our escape. Some nearby guards noticed what's going on, and the 3 of us started a big shootout with the security in a tiny hallway. As the security gained ground and our injuries piled up, I snuck out and hid behind some curtains. I waited for the right moment and dashed my way out of security, shooting several people on my way out. Then I began figuring out where to hide from security that's going to be looking for me, and how do I escape the bunker entirely. Despite being a 6-year-old Space Station veteran at the time, for the brief 20 minutes of that round, I had the feeling of playing Space Station for the first time, the feeling of playing LifeUp for the first time. I wasn't thinking in mechanics and metas, I was thinking about a living, breathing world that I was completely immersed in, and my decision making was coming out purely from my character's standpoint, rather than some meta green text achieving. But as I walk around and start to notice nobody actually seems to be coming for me, and I see Chef, which is clearly just a still copy-paste of old Bay 12 Chef with pointless minigames, and when I see Medbay and I realize it's still old Bay 12 Medical with its realism for the sake of realism, annoying as shit artery bleedings and infections, and slowly all the facade falls away. The game systems fall into my pre-existing frameworks and conceptions about Space Station, and I start thinking about the game in mechanical terms, and I realize that security probably doesn't know and doesn't care enough that I escaped, and the round turns into the classic walking around until something happens or you come up with a gimmick brain rot that plagues Space Station. This is the feeling I've been chasing all this time, and for a brief moment I experienced it again. And it largely comes down to novelty. The moment I noticed all the familiar content I'm sick of from playing usual Space Station, the game neatly folded into my mind's frameworks and memories, which let me meta-think about the entire game. This seems like an unsolvable problem, since really the only way to consistently provide novelty is infinitely generate content, which if you're tech savvy enough you could perhaps make some infinite scenario generator with some sort of AI, but that's a story for another time. Something more immediate is that there's already a tap of potentially infinite content on every Space Station server and iteration. Actually, a good couple dozen of them. Players. Games even with very dead simple mechanics, chess for example, become extremely complex and intricate strategies that could be studied and analyzed for decades through an addition of a very simple yet complex variable. A human mind. It's physically impossible for our human mind to completely encompass another human mind and meta-think about it. Interactions with another human mind will always be novel and unpredictable to some extent. While obviously in the example above there was some novelty of the new server and the new setting, it all fell apart very quickly the moment that the pressure of other human minds working against me dropped. Joining in as another role next round, I very quickly didn't have anything to do and rolled into the familiar routine of wandering. Note that this has happened a good few years ago and Reborn has come leaps and bounds since then. This is why after being a Space Station veteran, the game can become boring brain rot, yet the moment you get an untag, even on a server you despise, the game is immediately exciting and tense. Many servers try to add some purpose to jobs, to objectives, but objectives are not fun for the sake of the green text. They're fun because of the challenge. Making 3 Borgs as a roboticist is not an odds with anybody. It's a monotonous series of clicks. There's no tension, there's no risk, there's no drama, there's no story to tell after. Even if you make it complicated and make those clicks complex and non-monotonous, all you get is virology and xenobiology when one player sits in a locked room and plays a minigame for the entire round, completely bypassing what the entire game is even about. Interactions with other players, without a script, without a director, without strict rules, conflict, drama and stories. This is what drives Space Station and makes it alive. This is the core that makes Space Station special. All the dramatic and hilarious stories that come out of it, and this is what you need to cultivate to make something great in Space Station. We came back to our project after a short break. We took a step back, analyzed our design, planned more features, and actually had some small workable ideas for a game mode. Now this is the point where I'm starting to reach the end of my expertise. I could share some ideas, game modes and features we made and had planned in this period. None of them have passed through stages of iteration and playtesting, so essentially they're meaningless ideas and noise without any insight in their current stage. And they never left that stage, as quite a fundamental problem was discovered. Unlike older projects where the cause of failure was lack of skill or loss of morale, here there's a different problem. Bion. In the 1980s, the game Rogue was released. It was quite innovative in quite a lot of aspects, like its turn and tile-based movement in combat, procedural generation that made every run of the game unique, and permadeath, which added meaningful consequences to every action. By modern standards, it's quite antiquated and clunky, however at the time it was a hit which spawned many clones and copies. All of the copies and clones took the fundamental design fully and totally, and just added more content and features. However, as the roguelike genre evolved over the decades, counterintuitively the game became more and more nothing like Rogue. If you look at modern roguelikes like FTL, Spelunky, Nuclear Throne, Inscription, Noita, they're all very fundamentally different games. They play differently, target different audiences, have different game loops, difficulties, and so on. Yet they're all still roguelikes. They preserve that core that made the originals so great. The tension and risk caused by permadeath amplified by the unknown of procedural generation. In the early 2000s, the game Space Station 13 was released. It was quite innovative in a lot of its aspects, like its tile-based atmospherics, round-based structure, and roleplay-oriented gameplay. By modern standards, it's quite antiquated and clunky, however at the time it was a hit, which spawned many clones and copies. But when you look at Space Station, it's still stuck in the hole of clones on top of clones that all do the same thing over and over, with extra feature here and there. It's still that old, antiquated and clunky game with some great ideas inside of it. There's potential here to take those great ideas inside of it and repackage them in a better, more approachable way.
People shouldn't probably do their own thing from scratch. Like, I think it's a mistake. If you want to do your own thing from scratch, you just use the real engine. Like, use like Unity, Godot, whatever you to your liking.
Don't do it. This is a dead fucking game. If you're a creative person, if you're an artistic person, and you're not like a fucking talentless hack like me, what you should do is like make your own game. Don't waste your time on SS13 because like most of this shit you're not gonna be able to put in a curriculum, right? There's not gonna be any career growth for you. I mean, you certainly learn about coding and spriting and other stuff, but still, you'll be limited by Beyond. You would probably be better off using like an engine like, I don't know, fucking Godot, Unreal Engine. I fucking hate Unreal Engine, but still, it's, you know, industry standard.
Barotrauma is probably the only thing yet to do that, however it mostly takes the craziness and the wackiness that comes from the low RP servers to its potential. There's nothing yet to make drama, stories and tension that come from LifeWeb and similar servers reach their potential. There's a lot of uncertainty on how this successor would look outside of Beyond. Is being tile-based the best approach? Should the game be 3D or 2D? Should there be graphics at all or should it be fully text-based? Could you make procedural content with AI? Should you add VoIP or stick to typing? What if you add in the extra immersion that virtual reality brings to the table? There's a million more questions and experiments to be done. This new genre game is within its uttermost infancy, and like always in game dev, it's about iteration, experimentation, and playtesting. My quote-unquote failed server has been the jab in the right direction, and has taught me a lot. And honestly, there's still something in it. Another year or two of work and it could have been something spectacular. However, Beyond is an absolute pain to work with when you start pushing it beyond its limits. Combined with the fact that Beyond cannot accommodate even fraction of possibilities worth experimenting upon. So I'd rather cut my losses short. The big irony in all of this is, just when the horizon is in sight, just when the things are slowly falling into place, just when the struggle of failed ideas could be close to an end, it's no longer enough. I can do more. I can see the potential and dream beyond Beyond. Me and other people are already working on that experimentation and iteration. This is something a bit greater I alluded at the start of the video. I already had a part in creating Stillborn, a text-based game based off old mods, but instead of using old-school text-in, text-out terminals of the 90s, we built some actual interface. Another promising project to watch is Industrial Nightmare and its offshoots, which is a Gmod server, but in the same vein as it's hard to call LifeUp Space Station, with how much Industrial Nightmare overhauls and rethinks mechanics that are taken for granted, it's hard to call it a Gmod server as well. These projects had their own lessons and shortcomings, but that's a really topic for an entirely different video, and do let me know in the comments if there's interest in such video. There's so many things to try to build if people stop getting stuck on the idea this is a space station server, and all the baggage that the idea carries. Personally, I see Beyond development as quite futile and my ambition span beyond it. The choice of engine at the end of the day is a personal preference. Go make something great. I've started working on this video shortly after my final project has failed. However, if you look at the dates, it has been quite some time. I've abandoned, came back, and rewritten this video many times over the past few years. And the community of Space Station has not been static and involved in that time. So I'd like to address a few new things in the coming addendums. Wind back to the start of the video, where I talk about same servers sitting on the top of the hub, and Roguetown has spot out of nowhere and made itself a mainstay server relatively recently. Many of the casual players and community as a whole were surprised by Roguetown coming out of nowhere and taking the hub by storm. Since when is Space Station no longer a sci-fi space station? Why do all the sci-fi fans now are suddenly playing this fantasy game? However, having done all of this analysis, the success of Roguetown is not surprising at all. The omnipresence of influence of LifeUp is very clear. Roguetown is just the first thing to implement LifeUp's brilliant design decisions in another flavor and end up open source. Roguetown initially was very LifeUp-esque in its presentation, closed up Discord server with whitelists, and when you look at the game design, the influence of LifeUp is clear as day. Different religions with conceptions of good and evil, vices, group-based mid-round join, in-character law enforcement rather than oppressive moderation. It's zero surprise it's taking over.
Roguetown will be the last hurrah of Beyond SS13. I think the fact that it took me, a random old dev with too much time on their hands, to make the next big thing is shocking to me because I'm not a talented coder. I would say to go work on SS14 by learning C# or helping to work on Open Dream so us as 13 grandpas can move on to Space Station 14.
I'd like to commend Space Station 14 developers for their incredible achievement. Not only did they remake the entirety of vanilla Space Station, not only does it run excellently and have new features that take advantage of the new engine, but they also copied the Bion structure, where you can play on fundamentally different servers with different code and features from one launcher. Space Station 14 is a genuinely impressive piece of software engineering. It's not just a Space Station remake, but an entirely new engine that can be used for developing whatever you want, that takes the best parts of Bion without the bad parts of it. In a way, this feels like a waste, because all of the engineering effort was spent on recreating vanilla Space Station, with all of its design flaws, rather than building something new on top of it. But it would also be impossible to rally people behind anything else. This is why it took so long to break the curse. When people started their projects, they realized that the game can be improved in so many ways, yet all the developers joined the projects to remake Space Station, not to remake it into another game. Or if they did want to remake it into another game, it's not the game that everyone else wanted to. So when alternate visions would be proposed by dev teams, the projects would pull themselves apart, as everyone wanted to make something different, be it sticking with Space Station copy or some alternate vision. Space Station 14 is the first thing that pulled through that journey without derailing into something other than Space Station, and I really commend this achievement.
And I mean, looking ahead, I wouldn't be surprised if SS14 eventually pushes SS13 into the mainstream. I mean, as a genre in general. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, we'll see, but honestly, I could see SS14 or SS13 for that matter really become mainstream and be a game that most people respect, not just that niche little specimen nonsense that's been.
Now with Space Station 14 blooming on the horizon, I think it's clear to say that most mainstream lines of Space Station along the lines of TG and Bay will soon completely switch over to SS14. I do see Bion Space Station still retaining some activity, as niche servers will persist, as it's not an easy one-to-one port of them as it is for more classical servers. All in all, Space Station 13 is clearly becoming quite stagnant. However, at the same time, this game and its community have a very bright future.